Good morning, I'm Julio Sainz along with Mauricio Riveros. Today we'll meet Hector Castillo Carvajal, who started Don Carvajal Coffee out of his dorm room while still a student at the University of Rochester.
We hope you will be inspired.
Celebrating leaders in Rochester's unique and vibrant business community. We'll meet entrepreneurs whose passion and perseverance have helped push through life's challenges. Join us as we share their stories and journeys to success. It's time to be inspired.
Hector, thank you very much in Be Inspired, a show that we developed to interview interesting people like you who are entrepreneurs, people who start their vision, they have a dream and they start their business. And I know that your business is something very exciting. But before we talk about your business, let's talk about who is Hector Castillo Carvajal.
Definitely. Let's do it. So I'm a young kid from the Dominican Republic. So I came to New York City with my family when I was 8 years old. And I was raised in the Bronx my whole life and got educated here, lived here, traveled back and forth, to the Dominican Republic to always, stay connected with my roots, see my family from back home. At some point, ended up at the University of Rochester, where I transferred from CUNY, so the City University of New York. I studied liberal arts and sciences. Then I transferred to University of Rochester, where I studied business marketing. And that's kind of where I brewed up the idea of Don Carvajal Cafe, a specialty coffee company that's ethically sourced and sustainable.
That is wonderful. That is really wonderful. And so tell us a little bit that beginning, right? That beginning, I think you were in your dorm and you start thinking and have that business idea. So tell us a little bit about that.
It was very interesting because I had one really good cup of coffee, and I've found out in the industry that's typically how it starts. You have one good cup of coffee and then you're like, wow, this is actually good. This is not diner coffee, right? And it spiked some interest, and it made me research the coffee industry and kind of understand, how Colombian coffee is so special and why it's so famous and known worldwide, and just understanding the different practices of sourcing it directly and how it's harvested and produced and then brewed and roasted and all these other things that I, learned about. And at some point, I had a class for my major, and it was marketing 203. And we had to create a marketing plan and a business plan as a semester-long project. And we had to pick a brand. It's either you picked a brand, you made up a brand, or you just worked on one. And I kind of pitched it to my team. I was like, guys, I have this little idea that I'm curious about, and it's coffee, Don Carvajal Cafe, this little brand that I would love to put my grandfather on the face and just source sustainable coffee that's ethically sourced and roasted fresh every week. Like, it sounds like a good idea to me. And we just started digging into it. We started digging into it and looking up different research articles on it and how the industry has developed through time between Starbucks and Pete's, and then more modern companies in the third wave like La Colombe, and then where we are now. And and just listening to podcasts and just geeking out over coffee for about a year. And then then the project happened. So then the ending of the semester came, and we presented it, and I actually had a real coffee in the presentation. Like, we brewed coffee, we served everyone who wanted a cup. We had real beans there. We grounded it for people. They smelled it. It was freshly roasted locally at Java's. So Java's was so nice that they roasted it for us. Java's Cafe in Rochester, and we got the top grade of the class. People loved it. People loved the branding, the messaging, the quality of the coffee, the freshness of it. Everything just synced with people. And at the ending of the presentation, somebody raised their hand like, oh man, can I buy one of those bags at the front of the class? And I was just like, sure. And they asked me, how much is it? And I was like, well, the presentation said $17.95. It was a very comedic moment. And they bought it. And I was just like, somebody just bought this bag of coffee at my class presentation, and I can't believe it. You know what I mean? And at that moment, I was just like, okay, I guess I'm selling coffee. I had beans left over. I went on Instagram and I was like, guys, who wants to buy some coffee? Just DM me, send me a message, and I'll take Venmo, Cash App, Selly. If you want to pay me in a check for one bag, I'll take it. And I sold the 50 pounds of coffee in 2 days, ironically, on Instagram. And I just kept on doing it. 50 pounds every other week. And little by little, I made my e-commerce website, doncarvajalcafe.com. People that I've never met from Boston or Mississippi just started ordering it because they found it through social media, and they really resonated with the message of the brand and what we're trying to do for the coffee culture. And yeah, that's how it's been, and here we are. So it's kind of been this long trip of just doing what I do and hustling and grinding and finding new customers and people who believe in my vision along the way.
And I really love the story of started with a dream and really homework from the university, and now is landing in a business. So where the coffee come from? How the importation goes? Explain us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I did a lot of networking as I would listen to podcasts. So my trick to learning coffee in the beginning was like just listen to coffee podcasts, read books about it. But there's not too many books about it, but there's a ton of people talking about it online, right? Whether you're a coffee importer or a coffee brewer, a barista, a roaster, there's so many shows talking about the actual art. And I would listen to podcasts, and I would add the guest of the podcast on LinkedIn, and I would be like, "You said this, and I thought it was interesting. Do you have 30 minutes to just chat on the phone?" And some people will say yes, some people will say no, but that's kind of how I understood the importing and stuff like that. So then I figured out that a lot of farms actually import the beans for you, and they store it here in warehouses, and then you could just purchase from the farm directly back home, but you just pick it up at a warehouse here and they release it for you. So that's kind of how I was able to get direct beans from the farm without having to go there myself. You know what I mean? Because when you start off as a small venture, you don't have much capital, you don't have much knowledge, and you're new to the market. So that was, I would say, my advantage is that I was able to figure out that trick. So like our Colombian beans or Dominican beans, we source it directly through the farm, right? But we know that the farms bring it here, or they have an import partner that brings it here for us. Just like Brazil and Costa Rica, which I haven't built direct relationships with yet because of the pandemic. But that's the goal. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where I wasn't able to get my import license myself, nor did I have the volume to bring a 42,000-pound container of each country here. But I was able to, pivot and find alternative ways to still make impact and source the coffee directly from these farms.
Wow, fantastic! And as far as the selling of the product online, you said you created an e-store. An e-store. Could you tell people a little bit about how that? I'm sure lots of folks that are listening who maybe have an idea to sell something. Can you explain a little bit of the process for starting a store online?
Yeah, I would say starting a store online is really telling a story. It's really what I'm doing right now. It's telling a story and showing people the value in your product, and they can't see it. They can't. Well, they can't really physically see it. They can't really physically touch it, and they can't physically smell it. So a lot of the human senses go out the door. You can't hear the product. So you kind of have to make something that can appeal to people in a way that they can attract themselves to it, or feel attracted to the product. So typically, you got to reserve your domain, find a good web host, whether it's Shopify or Wix, Square, depending on what works for you. Typically, I would recommend a website or a host that also has a POS, right? Because if you end up getting a store, you would want to run the system on one platform rather than two different ones. So, it's all about reserving your domain, getting your logos right, getting the brand name, reserving the company name. Depending on what degree you are, you can reserve the actual brand name. Like you could patent it or copyright it, I would say. But yeah, it's all about just making it presentable, making it look nice, writing a really compelling story about the product, or describing the product to the point where people can understand it, to the point where they feel like they can buy it, where they can trust it, because they don't know you from a hole in the wall. Nobody from Miami knows me. I've never lived in Miami. I've been to Miami twice in my life, and it wasn't to sell coffee. So it's one of those things where, it's all about making a good, presentable website. It's like going to a job interview and just making it presentable and something attractive to people to buy into and invest, because they're technically investing into your product. Yeah.
That is really powerful. I just love your creativity and the capacity to use technology and open an avenue that has basically now become a real business. Now, what's your perspective? How do you see your business in the years to come? What's the vision that you have?
Yeah. As of recently, it's been clearing up for me. I see my business becoming something that is not creating something new. I'm just reinventing what was already there. You know what I mean? And for me to create something like the Greca blend, which is the Italian mocha pot blend that we recently released, it's like something that was so shocking to the market, because people were like, how do you make specialty coffee in a brewer that's not made for that? You know what I mean? There's a lot of these fancy new coffee makers, and here I am using specialty coffee that's very expensive for a brewer that your mom brews Bustelo in. That's 2 for $5, and it's, you know what I mean. People find that they can't connect to that, and I think it's one of those things where there's an industry that has been very strict about how things are done, and it's just like, how can we relax? I think we're in the generation of relaxing and trying something different and new. You know what I mean? And I kind of look at the industry and I look at everybody else, and I'm just kind of trying to find my own path within it. You know what I mean? And how can I do what you guys do, but at the same time create my own wave, create my own path, and then show people that you don't have to do what everybody else is doing to get there. You can kind of do what they do, but in your own way, in your own style, in your own fashion. And that's what I think Don Carvajal is going to do in the years to come. You know what I mean? Create coffee shops that feel different. Make coffees that you could not be a specialty coffee drinker, but you could feel like it's approachable. Like, oh, I don't have a fancy brewer, so I can't get this. You know what I mean? It's like drinking a fancy wine. Oh, I don't know how to appreciate it. You know what I mean? But how do we get you started in learning the steps to get there? And that's what I think the specialty coffee world needs. You know what I mean? I think there's a big disconnect between the people who drink convenient gourmet coffee versus specialty, 87, 90 points, where I have people who have bought Bustelo before, 2 bags for $5. And here they are spending $35 on a bag of a very limited edition batch from Colombia. And it's like, you just spent $35 on a bag of coffee. And you could have got so many more bricks of Bustelo for that, but people see the value in it, and I've spiked the curiosity to try something different, and I think that's what Don Carvajal is going to do for the years to come.
Well, thank you, Hector. We'll be back with more after these messages. Now, as far as I have a lot of questions. I'm a big coffee drinker myself, so I love it. Now, how important do you think it is to your customers, the whole sustainability? You mentioned that your coffee is 100% from sustainable sources, and how do you verify that?
Yeah. There's things like USDA organic, but there's also Rainforest Alliance certifications. There's fair trade, but fair trade is not so more about sustainability. It's more about how much the workers get compensated, their living situations and stuff like that. But for me, I make it my personal mission to go to these farms and for them to walk me through their process and how they actually are sustainable, and how do they repurpose water, and how do they take the coffee pulp from the cascara and reuse it as fertilizer and things like that. You know what I mean? And honestly, many of these farms cannot actually afford the inorganic compounds that would go into coffee because they're so small, and they prefer not to at the same time, but my mission is to always be very transparent about the process and actually meet them. One challenge that we faced during the pandemic, and the entire industry did, is that you couldn't really do origin trips, and that's when you visit a farm to build a relationship, right? Or create the marketing aspect of it. Oh, let's go to the farm and meet Juan, and actually photograph and document the trip, and let him walk us through the process of coffee at his farm. And that's something that we can show our consumers and be like, listen, this is what we're talking about. And he's going to tell it to you from his own mouth. I'm not going to interpret it. He's going to be the one telling you it. And I think a lot of companies face that challenge of transparency because they couldn't tell the story in a different light. But I think once the pandemic is gone, it'll change.
Oh, that is exactly right. It's all about transparency,
right?
Building relationships, establishing those connections, and verifying that the truth, right? That this is really organic. This is basically produced in a sustainable manner, and that is fundamental. Now, when we talk about the United States market, and we start seeing trends of more and more consumers of coffee. Seems like coffee, it's just becoming a massive opportunity and a massive market. Your penetration is in a very specialized market. You are focusing on a very niche, specific market. Do you see in some point you developing this concept and really be able to go with the bigger organizations and maybe try to partner with one of the largest retailers or things like that? Or are you visualizing in some point that type of effort?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I've thought about it a lot this past week because, we currently just launched our Kickstarter. So a lot of people have been asking, are you open to investment because of that, right? And honestly, I would say I will go as organic as possible as long as I can. And hopefully that's forever. You know what I mean? But if the opportunity arises where I could reach more people and provide more jobs and more opportunities and create a larger impact because of a partnership, I would most likely consider it. But if I can create that on my own, I would probably prefer that route. You know what I mean? So that's what I would say to that. Yeah.
Hector, I think I saw on your website something about where you're building your coffee roaster location in the Bronx. Can you tell us
Mhm.
about that?
Yeah, so it's actually like right here. So it's a new building going up, and it's called a Peninsula Project, and it's a few residential buildings and one big commercial space where I plan to put the roasting space in the cafe. It actually used to be a juvenile detention center back in the day, so it's kind of crazy that we're building something to create equity and change the narrative on top of that same soil. You know what I mean? So that's kind of one of the biggest takeaways that I've been going for this week, which is kind of surprising. But the idea is to build a space where we're bringing something new to the Bronx. You know what I mean? There has been roasting rooms in the Bronx in the past, but there's none right now. You know what I mean? So there's many in other boroughs like Brooklyn, upstate New York, Queens, you know, all over the area. There's a lot of them, but there's none in the Bronx. I know many baristas and coffee professionals that travel to other boroughs and travel an hour or hour and a half in the morning to go work somewhere else in the same profession that I want to bring here. You know what I mean? I think in the Bronx we don't have we don't have those many opportunities. And being that I grew up here, I didn't see many myself, so I had to go elsewhere. I had to go to Manhattan and study in community college. Then from there, I went to upstate New York because there was another opportunity, but I never found an opportunity here. And I think a lot of people leave or they look for alternatives outside of my community. And people always ask me, why don't you build it in Brooklyn? Why don't you build it in Manhattan or in Yonkers or Westchester? And it's just like, I want to build where I'm from. I mean, I want to build in my community. I want to provide opportunities for my people. And I think the sky's the limit. You know what I mean? And when you build something next to your people and they see you doing it, it's more of a moment of empowerment. Like, wow, oh, you did that. So I can do that too. You know what I mean? And that's how I got here because I saw other people doing their thing. And I was like, wow, you did that. So I could do that too. And it's about paying it forward, providing opportunities, bringing it to the community and just growing. You know what I mean? As I grow, people grow, and we all just grow together.
Hector, I just love your passion and your creativity. Every time that you express a new idea, you show how creative you are and you are thinking really in a very proactive way and a very smart and a lot of wisdom. My question goes, in order actually more, what would be your message to people who, has lost things during the COVID and they are in depression? Maybe they are not feeling, that that's the end, that they cannot do any other businesses. You have that capacity. I see that the spirit in you of an entrepreneur and figure it out. So if you can give a message to people who are struggling right now and give them the hope.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I talk to my friends about it all the time, whether they're in college or they're working a certain job or they own a business. And for me, the pandemic was tough because sometimes we'd be here because the consumption was so high, and some months we'd be down here, and then we're here, and then it's a roller coaster. But the number one trick is to not give up. Like you never failed if you never gave up. You know what I mean? And I know for some businesses it might be tough, like restaurants, but maybe start doing takeout more. You know what I mean? It's all about pivoting. Like the entire pandemic, I was just pivoting and finding new ways to just bring in revenue. Let me do more online sales. Let me do more social media marketing. Why? Because everybody's on their phone all day. It's all about finding the alternative. You know what I mean? Like I think there's always an option to figure it out. There's also a lot of programs out there: the SBA, the PPP loans, the grants, the economic disaster relief loans. There's so many opportunities for us to make it work. And I think we're living in a country where we have the opportunities to make it work. We just got to seek them and not give up and always push forward. You know what I mean? And honestly, in the middle of the pandemic, I was delivering coffee to people's houses. Like we offered door-to-door drop-offs. And it's like I'm dropping off a bag of coffee or cold brew to your house. Is that like that's what I did to survive? And then we also started doing more farmers markets. So we would literally set up a tent and tables and sell hot coffee, cold brew, and beans every weekend out of like 4 different towns. But it was pivoting to the point where it was like, okay, people are clearly not coming to me because I don't have a physical store and they're not going online. So let me go to you. You know what I mean? I'll drop it off to your home, 2-day delivery or something like that. Free delivery. Don't worry about it. We're not even charging shipping anymore. Something to just figure it out. I think the key is to never give up and just keep it pushing. And that's how you get to the finish line. You know what I mean? I think a lot of drops fill up an entire bucket, and that's what it takes to get to the finish line.
Wow, Hector, very impressive. It's really cool to see somebody who has figured it out. I love that every time that you have a challenge, you find something different. You are thinking in a different way that the majority of the people are thinking. And I think that's one of the keys for your success. I'm looking forward to see the growth of your organization, your company. I'm sure that we will have you back in this show and seeing the expansion of something that is so significant. And I really like the component, the social component that you have, the sustainability component, that element of create a win-win for all and building great relationships. Thank you so much for being inspired. You really have inspired us to today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
Coming up next week on Be Inspired, we'll meet Rachel Crawford, who founded Akimbo Books in the middle of the pandemic to bring unique books to Rochester.
To watch today's episode and the complete interviews of our guests, go to rochesterfirst.com/beinspired. For more great talk with Rochester's entrepreneurs, listen to Boded 97.1 Saturdays at 9 a.m. For Mauricio Riveros, I'm Julio Saenz. We'll see you next week on Be Inspired.